All right, so welcome to the Right to Publish, Getting and Using Feedback webinar. Today's session, we're going to talk a lot about practices. And I think what happens with feedback is oftentimes we feel perhaps a little disempowered, a little self-conscious, maybe put on the spot. So we're going to practice ways that we can be more empowered and more in control um, when we're asking for feedback on our writing. We'll talk about the types of feedback, who we get feedback from, at what stages, assessing and integrating feedback. As Brenda pointed out, that's really your choice. But if you get conflicting feedback, it can be difficult to determine what do you go with, what do you run with or not. Thinking about you and building your expertise, and that might be one of the ways that you kind of consider what feedback you take is like this is really about your project, and as you're building and kind of moving through kind of what direction you see that feedback most aligning, for example. And then if we have time, we'll do some Q&A at the end. Just a reminder, if you're doing the Canvas course, this week has a couple tasks, but only one submission. And it's pretty easy, just think about peer feedback and who it is that you might ask for some peer feedback on your piece. And just at a meeting, discuss 1 or 2 pages, what stage you're at. Include a short cover letter. We'll talk about the cover letter in a moment to focus their feedback. And then the same thing then with an advisor or mentor. And the reason these 2 different groups, one is, of course, the peer group, colleagues. They may or may not actually be within your field. They could be. But then also an advisor or mentor who's an expert in the field, right, who you're looking to learn from. And doesn't mean that you don't learn from both of those, you do. And sometimes you can learn more from one or the other, But that you want to be able to navigate both of those conversations and include a cover letter on both of them because both are important. And we tend to hesitate with our role models, with our mentors, with people in positions of power over us. We often hesitate to feel like we can direct them, but you totally can. You totally can. All right, so we've already done some of this reflection before starting the recording about who, when, what type of feedback, integration, and impact, and how developing our expertise a little bit. But that reflection, if you're attending the webinar, just know that there's also in the Canvas module, there is the questions for reflection there as well. But it's who's provided feedback, has it been consistent, and what's been most helpful. What strategies do you use to guide or focus the reader's feedback? How has that process typically worked? How have you felt in getting that feedback in that process? And do you currently track? And if so, kind of what's working for you? All of these are really important. And if you think about the nature of reflection, this is kind of our first practice is reflecting on our processes of getting feedback. Min Yang wrote a piece. She did a short, it's a little case study basically, and published it in the Journal of English for Academic Purposes. And talking about how a second language learner, doctoral student, had a writing experience and worked with supervisory feedback and reflection, and then being socialized into the field of writing in that area. And I just want to pull from the abstract just because it's the easiest, but for us to understand the value of reflection, on the one hand, we kind of take it for granted. We're kind of like, how did that work? And we just move forward. But if you do a formal reflection, particularly on the feedback that you're getting, you will learn so much more about it. And here, she mentions that moreover, the student digested feedback through an interactive process of reflection on feedback, reflection in feedback, and reflection for feedback at different stages of writing, showing that reflective practice is indispensable for feedback to serve as useful and readily available resources for writing. Such reflective practice about feedback was found to contribute to the students' cognitively, emotionally kind of growth into the field. So this kind of academic kind of discourse socialization, right? So that's what ADS is. But so if you're not regularly reflecting in some kind of formal process, I highly recommend that you do. Just take a moment and figure it out. I'm going to give you a number of practices that you can include that will be about reflection and kind of encourage you to do that. I think it'll also perhaps, but I can't guarantee anything, if you experience any kind of academic writing anxiety. Like maybe you write letters and emails and you're perfectly fine, but then all of a sudden you sit down to write your paper and it seems so much more loaded and pressured. Just having a little bit of time to reflect on those processes can alleviate a lot of that pressure. All right. So some caveats and reminders. Not all feedback is the same. Not all feedback is accurate. And not all feedback is kind or supportive. And we know this going into it. Have the best of hopes, please, please, please like it, right? And yet at the same time, we might actually have a great piece of writing, but whoever's giving our feedback for whatever reason is off kind of on their own little tangent, on their own little, kind of agenda. And maybe they're also not very skilled in giving kind or supportive feedback. So just know that if you're reading something that feels a little bit like accusatory, like my friend who got the feedback that was like, it sounds like a wildlife biologist wrote it. And she's like, well, I am a wildlife biologist. Just know that that was not kind and that just happens. However, the best feedback is targeted to the work on the page and not you as a person, right? So if you're getting feedback about it feels like an attack against you being a wildlife biologist, then just know that has nothing to do with the writing, and you can dismiss that comment out of that's not relevant for your purposes. You don't have to even have to pay attention to it. Note that the best feedback will also come from a variety of readers. So you'll have peers, you'll have perhaps even people who are outside of the field reviewing and giving you just good feedback. And that all good feedback helps you improve the quality of whatever manuscript or proposal, what you're working on. And so the goal is always the improvement of that text and your growth as a writer through the process of improving that text, right? And so that's going to help you develop your expertise through writing. We don't develop expertise ever without having feedback. It is the essential process of expertise. If you can think about expert chess players, athletes, musicians, they all require detailed and kind of quick and speedy feedback on what their performance was. The challenge, of course, with writing and it's that it goes away for a while and it takes a while for it to come back. And so the processes are quite slow sometimes. But I think that we're speeding up a bit, and you can also figure out ways to kind of get different types of feedback. We'll talk about that in a moment, like if you need something immediately. AI is helpful in that regard. So you can think about the types of feedback that are available. These are the kind of 4 most common types in academic writing and research writing, the work that we do: corrective, directive, interactive, and evaluative. And it's helpful for you to know the types of feedback, not so that you can tell others, well, please give me only interactive feedback or directive feedback. I mean, maybe you want to have to do that, but I don't suggest that. What I do think is helpful though, is for you to understand what type of feedback you're asking for when you say, please look at, and you guide their eye. And I think it's also helpful when you get something that is, for example, evaluative. So this sounds like a wildlife biologist wrote this. There's a kind of judgment there. There's nothing to be corrected. There's no direction towards the page. There's nothing interactive or conversational about it. And it's an evaluation. And yet it doesn't seem to be a good evaluation, but you can't really do anything with it. So actually you can dismiss that one. So it's helpful to know these categories. And I'll give you some definitions in a moment. Here we go. So that corrective feedback is just what it sounds. The reviewer makes the corrections on the page, and then the writer does little. So you're just getting those corrections. If you are co-authoring with an advisor or someone else and you're running close to deadline, generally you're in that kind of corrective stage. Just give me the feedback, just like, let's just fix it, and so we can send it off, right? That's why you want to make sure that if you are up against a deadline or a deadline's looming, that you'll still give enough breathing space for you to be able to get some good feedback that's not just corrective from an advisor, an expert in the field. Directive feedback, that's where the reviewer or your advisor, whoever is giving feedback, points out specific problems and then offers specific suggestions for correcting, but doesn't make those corrections themselves, right? So you have to apply those suggestions. Oftentimes you'll get directive feedback, and depending on the quality of the direction, you may be pretty clear on what you need to do in correcting or adjusting a section. or you might have gotten directions and you're still not quite clear. If that ever happens, that's a place for you to ask additional questions of your reviewer, your advisor, and say, okay, I know you're giving me some feedback and you're telling me you're making suggestions. I'm still not clear on what I need to do. Because if you go without having clarity and start making suggestions changes based on that feedback that you've now perhaps misunderstood, you can be spinning in circles, going around and around and around, getting additional feedback that's directive, but also perhaps not making the right changes. It's good to just bring those up if you're not understanding. Interactive feedback. This is where the reviewer, your advisor, is going to give you some feedback about the text, maybe offer some commentary, some questions. They'll say, this is a little bit confusing. How does this relate here? They'll not give you many suggestions, though, on how to fix it. It's up to you then to determine how is it that you're going to make those adjustments and decide how that you're going to address them. That interactive, again, ask more additional questions if you are also not clear. Like, I can see that you're pointing out that this is a problem area, but I thought it was well done. I'm missing kind of your point and your confusion. So let's have a conversation. And sometimes it could be one or two sentences are missing, or it could be one or two paragraphs, right, of detailed information and connections are missing. So it's helpful to get some feedback, additional feedback then in those instances. The evaluative feedback, this is the one that I think we are most fearful of, right? This is where the reviewer just makes a judgment call. And those are our categories of A, B, C, D, F. Like, what's the evaluation of the quality of this feedback? It could be this is good, this is bad. We tend to hope either that we're in the good category, but fear that our writing is going to somehow be deemed in the bad category. You can do a lot starting things off with a cover letter and giving some good setup information to kind of guide whether you're going to get what type of evaluative feedback you're going to be getting. Just know that exams are high pressure evaluative, but chapters of dissertations oftentimes back and forth, right? So there can be some evaluative of, I like this is good, keep going in this direction. That's, an evaluation perhaps, but it may not mean that it's done, right? It may not be A. Feedback can look really different and depending on how it is that you're getting that feedback. Here's some corrective feedback. This comes from an abstract that Carol Willis in Cell Molecular Biology has allowed me to share. We do a course together. And so this was her just going in and at the 11th hour, right before an abstract is due, being sent an abstract from a student where she just has to go through and make those changes. When we get feedback like this, it's really easy for us to go, accept all, right? And then ding, we have this finished abstract. By accepting all, we assume that it is all how it should be. Well, first of all, just know that your advisors and experts in the field are human too. And so if you're submitting something that has your name on it, you also want to be the person who goes through and does another review and another read through just to make sure that you agree and that your advisor has not used a word that shifts the meaning or is incorrect in some ways. We tend to not think that our advisors would do that, but you never know. Like, maybe there was a misspelling, maybe there's something off. I can see just even here a couple things where there's some spacing just off, right? There are things that would still need to be fixed or addressed here. So don't assume that you can just take corrective feedback and be done with it. Interactive feedback, these are some sections from a course that I used to teach in civil and environmental engineering on writing, and it was students who were non-native English writers, but doing a thesis that needed to be published. So they had kind of stringent guidelines for this thesis and article generation. And we would go through, and every week they would submit 25 plus lines to me, and I would go through and I would just identify any errors that were happening along the way. And that's by doing that, they were tracking those errors. So they were building language skills, but also note that I gave them the categories by which there were errors, little squiggles, and kind of identifying in the margin then what kind of errors, so they could go and see it themselves if they weren't already seeing it. but there was no corrective feedback here. There wasn't me giving them the correct word choice. It was me saying there's a problem here with your word choice. It also gave us, and the reason why this one's interactive and not directive is that we would have then conversations. So we would have consultations based on these pages. So how we interact with that. That's it, interactive. My recommendation is to make sure that you develop a practice of tracking your feedback. That can be through the grids that I mentioned. You know, if you're having reviewer feedback regularly, reader one, reader two, what are they saying? And can you kind of see what the order of that is? Take it out of the document itself, out of the margins, so that you can see it not in connection with your own writing, but as a set of assessments or comments in your writing, and then you can identify how it is that you will address those. It keeps it a little bit more objective, perhaps, and a little bit clearer for you to be able to figure out what changes you're going to be making, but also then what learning you want to do. If you're consistently getting the same kind of feedback, it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be any kind of system like a journal or Excel or Word document. And again, that creates that kind of distance between who you are as a writer. Look for repetitions and find patterns. You can find exercises that help you craft your own writing experience and growth. Build your own awareness and kind of target that in a version of like self-mentoring. And you can then see your growth over time and how it is that you've become better than before. So it's super helpful tracking that feedback. You can track comments and you can identify themes by doing that. So is it in your expression of the research or the scholarly content that you're having challenges, or is it in those sentence level errors, right? Is it a word choice issue that you typically have, or a clarity of expression? I got a lot of like syntax errors. I would start a sentence off in one way and then finish it in another way. You might notice that I do that when I talk as well, which can make it difficult for people if I start off one way and then I backtrack and kind of start the sentence again and say something else or more nuanced. But if you're doing that in writing, it becomes just really obvious and difficult for readers to process. So that clarity of expression would be off, right? Wordiness, passive voice, jargon. If you're an English learner, what are some of those errors? It might be with prepositions, for example, or articles, indefinite or definite articles. So what are those sentence level errors that you can identify? And then you can focus your learning in those areas. So it doesn't become all of writing that you need to fix. It just becomes a little bit. You can have a tracker. I think this is in your Canvas course, but if not, I'm happy to add it. So this is one of the things that I would use in the course that I taught in civil environmental engineering, but we've also brought in and we use it as part of the cell molecular biology workshops. And it just lets you know that there are some errors that interfere with reader understanding. There are some that are likely to interfere with reader understanding. And then there are errors that are less likely to interfere. And then there's some that are not very big issues, but they can make your writing seem sloppy. What's nice about this is if you have sentence level issues that you can then start targeting where it is that you're getting most of your comments. So those handwritten comments that you saw on sheets before, each manuscript or each iteration, folks could go through and track how many unclear sentences do they have, how many sentence fragments do they have, how many word choices, etc. So they could kind of see where their biggest problem areas and start focusing on those. Another practice that I recommend, and this goes to who it is that you're asking for feedback from, is to ask for short and kind of regular reading appointments for low stakes targeted feedback. This comes from Patricia Goodson as a good reminder. She talks about reading appointments and just schedule appointments with skilled readers. They don't have to be your mentor, but they could be, but peers, just 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Take a look at this paragraph. What are you seeing? Short pieces of writing for some accountability. If you have a writing group, this is a great way, just exchange a little bit of writing, not too much. You don't want people to get bogged down. And you don't want to treat review particularly with your colleagues or even with your advisor, as the way that you fix the entire manuscript. That's just a lot to ask of a person. And if you find that you have sent an entire chapter to an advisor and it's then taken them 4 weeks plus, or sometimes 4 months plus to get back to you about it, so that's overwhelming. It's so much to read through. But if you do regular reading appointments, you're taking care of things a little bit along the way. It's much easier to track. And you can think about the different types of feedback that you get by different groups of people. General readers, kind of people who are not experts in your field, they can give feedback at early stages, right? They can, is this interesting? Does the main argument seem to be fleshed out? Is it kind of memorable? Do we understand kind of what's going on? Criteria-based feedback, those are people who are in at the mid or late stages, but you also want to have people who are a little bit more expert in your field, know a little bit more, because they're going to be giving you your feedback based on the type of manuscript you're writing. Is it relevant for your field? And then definitely by the end stages, you want to be getting expert feedback, mid to late stages from your committee advisor. The place where this is, and this I pulled this from Peter Elbow's work, but I think there's a place where field-specific work, early stages, is also really helpful. For those of you who might have started a manuscript and then realized that you've gotten 10 pages into it, you get it, send it to your advisor because you're like, I think I'm lost here. And they're like, oh yeah, you were lost from the very beginning. So go back to page 1 and start over. So at some point you want to just, again, 15-minute little check-ins, am I going in the right direction? If you feel like you need that. If you don't feel like you need it, then don't. Just wait and hang on. The cover letter, I mentioned that as being a practice of when you submit a draft to your mentor, or anybody else, actually, you can facilitate smooth feedback. We use this in our editing groups and other groups where you have to just craft a few statements, 1, 2, 3, that tell us what you think the draft is about, what's going on in it, and then what you think went well, what do you like, what's working, and then what do you still require help with. That last, what you still require help with, that's where they can give you the best feedback, right? And you also, by giving them these 3 things, prime them to be able to give you good feedback. They know what's going on. They know what you at least think is going on. They know if there's something there that you think is going well and your advisor is like, oh, it's not going as well as they think it is, then they can give feedback on that too. But then the last, what you still require help with, that's the place where then they can say, oh, this is where you know that you are in control of your writing and that you're looking for some additional guidance here. And they don't have to give feedback on everything else. Because I guarantee you, anyone, if they're reading and going towards just anything and everything without any guidance, they're going to go for grammar. They're going to go for punctuation. They're going to go for the low-hanging fruit because it's going to be the little annoyances that they'll make comments on. And then it's harder for you to sort through all of it. You're like, yeah, I knew all that stuff was off, but I just wanted to get the big picture kind of. And then they've kind of forgotten perhaps about the big picture and giving you all the little feedback. Still the same thing with peers, right? One to 3 sentences, or 2 to 3 sentences, excuse me, kind of the big picture. What is this about? And then what do you want feedback on with style or grammar or proofreading, right? How to receive feedback. Well, if you use your cover letter to request feedback, it really helps you on what it is that you know that you're going to be getting back. And so you can separate that delivery from the message, create some distance there too. Listen and don't talk. This is Wendy Belcher's kind of genius advice, which we all know on one level, but have a difficult time doing, is that as soon as somebody starts talking about what they see in our writing, we want to defend it. We want to tell them how they're wrong, how they're off. Just sit back and listen for a moment and see where they go. It may be that they really have misread something, and that you need to kind of just say, yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Can we talk about this other thing here? Because if they've misread it and you know that they're giving you feedback that's a misreading, you don't need them to continue on with that. But you do need to listen, and you want to listen to hear what's the rest of the feedback that they've got. Take advantage of the opportunity to hear, right, about your work. It's such an honor to have people read your work and give you feedback. Very few people, right, will be reading academic work. We labor on it, and very few people are in our area of expertise. So take advantage of it. And when people say that they're willing to read your work and give you some feedback, be gracious and thankful. And just know that you are ultimately the final authority on your writing, that you get to make those decisions. So, in how to give feedback, this is if you're asked in your colleagues or writing groups or peers, if they don't already tell you, ask them what would be most helpful, because then you have kind of what do they need feedback with. And if they just say, oh, everything and anything, you say, well, what I really am good at giving feedback is on the big picture or whatever. And is that good for you? So you can kind of lead through that because sometimes we just don't know, right? If we're like, I don't know what I want feedback on. And then generally, unless they tell you that they want feedback on their bibliography or what's not in the article or other things, just avoid that and avoid fixing everything for them and judging the work. Those are things that, are beyond your kind of purview as somebody who's just giving feedback to colleagues. When you submit for publication, right? Consider, does the journal or the panel, do they have an existing forum or form for reviewers where you can go and you can get additional information? Sometimes you can get comments from other folks who have submitted and they share out what it is that their experience has been through the peer review. What do you know about that process? And then what are the criteria that they're going to use to score it? Belcher, in her book, she references cultural anthropology because it's kind of one of in her area, and they have a review form, and you can see the Canvas PDF there, where they ask their reviewers to give feedback about kind of general strengths, the content, the organization, the contribution to the field, kind of general. What did you find most intriguing about it? Here, in thinking about what are the strengths, it's pretty broad. But then the content goes much more specifically into the argument, the claims for significance, does it situated well within the scholarly literature? So that they're looking at your literature review, they're looking at very specific things, right, on this feedback form. Just a reminder on why articles don't get published. If you look at where structure and grammar are, is pretty low. And the top reasons why is that the research seems inconsequential or there's a lack of integration of what's out there and poor connection to theory and poor evidence. So if you're up here, you know that you have a consequential research, you know that you have a great literature review and great connection to other people in the field, and you have great evidence, make sure that that shows up in the writing itself. Sometimes if your writing is poor, those are the things that get hidden. And so it may be that you have all those things, but because of other things, maybe the expression is the issue. But generally, just make sure that you've got everything represented that you want to have there. Also, when submitting a piece of writing to your committee for feedback, just clarify their expectations for the completeness of that draft. Do you need additional guidance or clarification, right, from a committee member? And thinking again that you're if you get conflicting views from your committee, what is it then that you can draw on and see that's maybe aligned between those two views? What is it that you can see that's perhaps bickering behind the scenes that you don't have any control over? Ultimately, if you're having a difficult time reconciling the differences, go with your chair, because your chair is the person who's going to be able to make the decisions for the committee overall. If you have someone who's I don't want to use the word weak, but you know what I'm saying, like somebody who's not a decisive chair, you could go to another committee member, but just know that those again are some of the challenges, right? Because you're going to tell your chair, well, so-and-so says X, Y, and Z. So you want to make sure that you're working with your chair to the best of your ability and reconciling those. Ultimately, has your document met the criteria? And if not, your writing, once again, explain where your work deviates and why, because then you have control over it. You're not just saying, oh, I don't want to listen to you. You're saying, I understand your points. However, this is why I've chosen to write about this or include this or exclude this, whatever it is, the reasons why. And then include a cover letter to help them understand, right, the context of how it is that you've addressed their feedback and used it. Ultimately, in the end, when challenged, take a breath and remember your practices. And that your goal is to develop your field expertise through your writing, right? So that means that you be attuned to detailed and high quality feedback. If you don't have high quality feedback, that's attunement, right? But People are giving you good feedback, hang on to it. There's some useful reads. I'm happy to make additional recommendations. All of these, however, are books that we've talked about in this course and are on the syllabus. And just a reminder, if you're doing the Canvas course and doing those submissions, that you have just peer feedback and advisor feedback to schedule, right? And then those cover letters and statements. It can be 3 sentences, right, for each.